me from downtown Miami is veteran Miami newsman Eliott Rodriguez. His nickname is E-Rod in those parts, not to be confused with A-Rod, who's another Miami product, but he is now retired from the news industry, having last been at Channel 4. And he's been doing this for decades. I remember you at WPLG, Channel 10. I've been reading your bylines in the Miami News from the 1970s. Sir, you are now considering a run for the 27th U.S. Congressional District, which cuts across Miami and Coral Gables and much of South Florida. How are you?
I am doing great, and greetings from your hometown. I know how much you miss Miami, and we're looking forward to your next visit down here. When are you going to get down here?
Well, as you know, like I encountered your byline and your works on TV because I covered the Cuban American drug trafficking experience out of Miami, which cut across a bunch of other anthropological and sociological fault lines, which had you kind of front and center, even if you were not considering this role. If I were having a beer with you, you know, at John, whatever it is, that old Irish pub on Miracle Mile.
John Martin's,
or somewhere on Brickell, which is unrecognizable vis-a-vis when I lived there at the turn of the century. I'd be asking you about the Cuban American mindset in Miami right now. You, of course, were born in the United States to Cuban American parents, right? You spent time in, obviously lots of time in Miami, in the Bronx. What explains the enthusiasm or the willingness to look the other way, the enthusiasm for MAGA and the Trump administration, when so many Cuban Americans, people who came here in the early 80s, Mariel refugees, people who don't have criminal records, are being arrested and deported? Everybody knows everybody down there, and yet the support for Trump remains seemingly ironclad.
Well, we're going to see about that in the midterms, aren't we? I ask myself that all the time. We as Cuban Americans are either immigrants, first generation Americans. In my case, my parents came from Cuba in the 50s before the revolution and settled in New York. And at the time when I was born in the mid 50s, my dad had been in the United States for a good long while. My mom had just arrived the year before. I'm not sure she had finalized all her immigration documentation. So I think to myself, what if in those days, in the 1950s, before Cubans had that special privilege that they could stay here with wet foot, dry foot? This was before all of that. What if my mother had been stopped and asked for documentation? What if she didn't have all the proper documentation at that very moment? She did have a husband who had naturalized as an American. I was born American in the United States. What would have happened to my mom? So I put myself in that situation and say, if it wasn't okay for it to happen to us, why is it okay to happen to people nowadays? And I think a lot of Cuban Americans are changing their views about how they feel about Trump's immigration policy because it's affecting them personally. They have family members who are being sent back. Can you imagine? I could never have imagined the United States sending people back to a dictatorship that we have been trying to topple for, 6 decades? So there is a lot for the Cuban American community to think about right now and to consider whether we should reconsider our position on Trump's immigration policy. And then we're at it at that. Maybe we should consider some of the other policies that are not helping this community at all.
For our non-Miami lay listener, the Cuban Revolution was 1959. Prior to that, Cuba was in many respects kind of a Vegas of the Caribbean. There were easy flights that you could get from Miami. The mafia had a huge presence there. There were legendary casinos, houses of ill repute. You could get whatever you want. You could bribe anyone, and certainly became a Cold War flashpoint by the time Fidel Castro was there. There's the Bay of Pigs invasion, I believe, in 1961, which had egg on the face of the United States, which didn't finish the job of getting Fidel Castro out. You had many, many thousands of angry exiles in the United States. And I in my book, in the Cuban Missile Crisis, let's not forget that, all that sublimates into this long anger until kind of Ronald Reagan's presidency, where once again there was a potent anti-communist, anti-Castro, communism in Central America impulse, which rallied the many Cuban Americans over there. What blows my mind is when I speak with people who came here either in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, and beyond, it's seemingly they look at themselves oftentimes as a different class. Like they will look down at the people who came in 1980 as Mariel refugees, who was, boat lifters. The people who came in the 1960s, the old money people say, we were of class. We had our farms and our businesses taken care of. These were mere criminals that came here. And yet, every generation passes and they'll look at the most recent arrivals here as ones who are okay to deport almost. We can look the other way. I know that's a mouthful. I wanted to ask, is that kind of a uniquely Cuban American experience to say, I'm American enough right now that I can be nationalistic and jingoistic about it?
No, I think it is a true statement, but we have to understand the history behind it. The other day, I had a conversation with a fellow Cuban American, that's, talking about people say, oh, come here legally, right? And we were talking, and he told me that his father came on the Mariel boat lift, which, as you know, was an exodus, was a crisis where Castro
In
even
1980,
in 1980,
120,000 people, he said, I'm flushing my harbors of these people,
that's
sending
right.
them into Miami.
And Jimmy Carter, who was the president at the time, said, we will welcome them with open hearts and open arms, right? So all these people came, and this person who I talked to is now the son of Marielito, we used to call him, of a Mariel refugee, said, yeah, I came legally because under the Cuban Adjustment Act, any Cuban who steps on U.S. soil automatically gets to stay. Therefore, that's considered legal. Well, I wonder if it's a special privilege that one group has because other immigrants are capable of stepping on U.S. soil. So, we have to be a little bit more empathetic. But I will say this, Cuban Americans vote emotionally, vote with their heart because of the trauma that was caused by the Cuban Revolution. Now, you have to remember, you mentioned that in the 1950s, Cuba was a playground. There was the control of the mafia in the casinos, absolutely, because they knew how to run casinos. Guess what? They recruited them from Las Vegas. So they had experience in running casinos. That's why they were in Cuba. But the first time I went to Cuba as a journalist, in the 1990s, and I drove around certain neighborhoods in Havana, for example, Miramar, El Vedado, beautiful homes, mansions. And I said, wow, if I owned one of these homes and from one day to another, some guys in green fatigues knocked on my door and said, get out of here. This house does not belong to you. It belongs to the state. This business does not belong to you. It belongs to the state. What you worked hard for does not belong to you. People who had no involvement in politics at that time were uprooted, and they came to South Florida in the 1960s. That was the first big wave, thinking that we're just going to wait this out. Oh, Castro deposed the dictator at the time. We're going to go back. Well, it hasn't gone back. So it's a trauma. And then there was the letdown of the Bay of Pigs invasion, which was planned under the Eisenhower administration, but it was carried out in the early days of the Kennedy administration. And President Kennedy, at the last minute, pulled the air cover that the brigade of Cuban Americans who were trained by the CIA to invade Cuba in 1961, and that invasion was a disaster.
And a year before he was assassinated, he's at the Orange Bowl of Miami he's saying we're going to return this flag to Cuba, to many veterans of that aborted invasion who were cashed out. It was a very big black eye for the United States. I mean, you had Fidel Castro thumbing his nose at the U.S., suddenly blowing kisses at Moscow. It just was a very bad look, in addition to infuriating all these people who were implicitly promised. And, and history rhymes. Again, I could tell you about the Iranians and the Iranian street right now with the Trump administration and the perceived that, we have your back behind the revolution. But what is still amazing and unresolved to me is that even to this day, if you were a person who came here under, there was an airlift of kids that the Jesuits helped called Peter Pan. Right? That came here. These people, some of whom in my book have accumulated, criminal records, nonviolent criminal records, they're still open to be deported. And there's this open shock that kind of, wow, I didn't realize that applied to me when I wholeheartedly threw myself behind Trump 2024.
Well, now people are seeing that, guess what? It is applying to Cubans. You have Cubans who are showing up at immigration court to try to do the right thing and follow the rules that are then picked up being picked up by ICE and have been sent back to Cuba, a place that's out in deep crisis right now. And the thought of sending people there just boggles the mind. I think the answer to all this is to have immigration reform, to follow our immigration rules. We have rules on the book. Let judges decide. Sure, secure the border, but have a fair immigration system that treats everybody equally and respects due process, our Constitution, and the laws that are on the books.
Eliott, explain if you can for our listeners today, because we're going to get into the state of Cuba where it is right now. It's pretty much a failed state at this point. It's at the weakest, arguably, it's been in decades. It's been brought low by the kind of the invasion of its partner state in Venezuela, which was getting it oil and money and everything. And now you pretty much can't even afford to fly a plane into Havana. There's no jet fuel. There's no food. The trash is not getting picked up. Wastewater treatment. I mean, all of the hallmarks of a really impoverished, failed state. What happens if today in 2026 South Florida, if some sort of rinky-dinky, rickety boat pulls up in Key Biscayne with a bunch of Cuban boat lifters? How are they handled? How is it processed? What is the protocol for that?
Well, that policy has changed so much over the years, Robin, and you're very familiar with it. There was a long while where anybody who arrived from Cuba was either picked up at sea and brought to shore, or when they get to shore, they automatically get to stay in the United States. After 1 year, they get residency. That has changed. It first changed during the Clinton administration, where the Clinton administration made an agreement with the Cuban government to accept people who came here illegally. And that was the start of the so-called wet foot, dry foot policy, which was a U.S. policy that said, if we pick you up at sea, we're going to send you back to Cuba. Cuba's going to accept you. If you come to the United States and step on U.S. soil, because of the Cuban Adjustment Act, that's a law that was passed in the 1960s, then you automatically qualify to stay in the United States and get your residency after 1 year. Now, that is a privilege that other immigrants do not have in this country.
Haitians or Dominicans or Bahamians do not get this.
Nobody has it, but that was a law that was passed by the Congress of the United States back in the 60s because of the mess that happened in Cuba, which the United States had a major hand in. We've talked about a lack of support in the Bay of Pigs, the support that they gave the Batista regime, or pulled out support at the last minute, which opened the door to Castro. So we as Cubans feel that we have been let down over and over again, not just by the United States, of course, by that horrible communist system on the island, the regime. It's a brutal regime, corrupt regime. And, we've been living with this for 65 plus years. And again, that's one of the reasons why Cubans are so emotional anytime that issue comes up, whether it's the issue of immigration, the issue of the embargo, which the United States has had for so many years. There's a travel restriction. Americans are not allowed to travel to Cuba unless it's under certain circumstances. That's not a law passed.
Churches and synagogues and not-for-profits. It's such an easy, flight. You barely have time for a soda. If you
that's not a law, right? And those are not rules that were set in place by Cuba. These are rules set in place by the United States.
Sure. Full disclosure, I'm Roben Farzad. Our guest is Eliott Rodriguez. He's a veteran Miami newsman. He was at the Miami News in the 1970s. I remember him at WTVJ, WPLJ, most recently at WTVJ, where he retired. You are, of course, considering a run for the 27th Congressional District in South Florida, which cuts across swaths of Palmetto Bay, Coral Gables, downtown Miami. This is now held by Maria Elvira Salazar, who was also a former newswoman. And prior to her, it was Donna Shalala, who was the former president of the University of Miami. She's been on the show. And prior to that was a Clinton administration cabinet member. It's a very interesting district in that it is overwhelmingly Hispanic. 74%?
I think it's a little less than that. I think it's about high 60, 68% Hispanic. And of those, the majority are Cuban American. So it's a heavily Cuban American district, but it's very evenly divided between Republicans, independents, and Democrats. I think it's an R+7 district, but there's a big swath of independent voters that are right smack in the middle, and they feel that nobody's listening to them.
And that was a blue wave state, a blue wave district, I remember in 2018, if that was when I interviewed her after 2018, the big wave that came in after Trump was first elected, the blue wave that he dealt with.
Yeah, Donna Shalala held the seat. She defeated Maria Elvira, served one term, and then Maria Elvira ran against Donna Shalala 2 years later. And Shalala has been criticized for some of the people that were running her campaign may have been from out of town. Maybe she, uh, dropped the ball there. But Donna Shalala was doing a wonderful job. Maria Elvira, on the other hand, had a career in Spanish language television, a long career, and she found herself jobless before she decided to run for office. And I think her record leaves a lot to be desired for the people who live in that district.
I had a screenplay, Jobless in Journalism is like the next Sleepless in Seattle. I mean, we're all jobless. I mean, what are we? We're people with microphones at this point, little avatars. But I digress. Didn't Hillary Clinton overwhelmingly take that state in that district in 2016, and then it went overwhelmingly Trump in 2020?
You know what? Florida has been a red state for a long time, Robin. It's been a long dry spell for Democrats. What I'm hoping is that Democrats get their act together. When I was a journalist, never disclosed my politics. It was nobody's business. I never flaunted my political affiliation. But since a group of people approached me about a possible run, I said, well, yeah, I'm a Democrat. I've always been a Democrat. My dad was a Cuban Democrat. We do exist. There's quite a number of us here. And we are able to vote for a Democratic candidate. And a lot of us are right smack in the middle. And a lot of Cuban Americans who are in that district, who are like me, who still have family members in Cuba, are concerned about what's happening in Cuba. But everybody is concerned about what's happening in the district. And our local member of Congress never talks about the affordability issue. She never talks about the infrastructure problems that we have in Miami. I don't know if you've been to Miami lately.
Oh yeah,
It
it's
takes an
unrecognizable.
hour and a half to get anywhere. The number of people that lost their Obamacare subsidies. This is one of the biggest districts in the country for Obamacare.
So I wanna ask you about that specifically because my congresswoman was Abigail Spanberger back in the day, and she is now governor of Virginia. She gave the rebuttal the other night to the State of the Union address. Was a guest a year ago on Full Disclosure Live. But I remember in a post-mortem of a very close election, she said the party should never mention socialism again. That is a bad word. We can't put lipstick on that pig. And yet, as you know, many constituents, many older constituents count on Obamacare subsidies, Medicare, Medicaid, right? Aid to families with dependent children. So on the one hand, they will very angrily, Cuban American experience, as we talked about, the anger inveigh against the socialism, a kind of expropriation that they might remember from revolutionary Cuba, where somebody would just show up and take your farm. Somebody would just show up and take your tractor, would take your livestock, would take your house, would say that it now belongs to the state, versus some of the trappings of demography and American life, either as a green card holder or as a citizen of the United States, where you get Medicare if you're older, you're eligible for Social Security, your children get English as a second language. Another John Martin's pub question for you is, what is exactly that line of socialism? What arose by any other name, like benefits, trappings of citizenship versus Castro's here?
Maybe they need to come up with a new name for it. But, I don't think that's unique to the Cuban community. How many non-Cuban people in this country say, we don't want socialism in this country. We're against it. Don't touch my Social Security. Don't touch my Medicare. So I don't think it's unique to the Cuban American community. The Cuban American voters were, swayed won over early on by the Republican Party in Florida. Part of the reason is the Democratic Party was asleep at the wheel. The incident with John Kennedy and the Bay of Pigs, a lot of Cubans still have resentment over that. The Eliott Gonzalez case, which we haven't talked about that. That's the young boy that was sent back. That did not do the Democrats any favors in the state of Florida. So it's been one misstep after the other by the Democratic Party. And that's what's, I think, locked the Cuban American voters in South Florida into the welcoming arms of the Republican Party, which is a very well-oiled machine here in the state of Florida.
But when you're out there talking to people, and certainly you would be immediately recognized at La Carreta or Versailles, the coffee window outside of Versailles. There was the former head of CBS News, David Rhodes. He always would joke with me that if there's one property you want to buy, it's across the street at Versailles, because this place gets so much money from these food trucks, from these news trucks with the telescoping antennas. Anytime there's a rumor of Castro falling or something happening, you could just squat the news trucks there. It's a very valuable property. They always stop there to get commentary from the guy on the street, the aggrieved exile and whatnot. What do you hear at the ground level if you're there in Little Havana, which after all is part of the district, about things like Obamacare subsidies, about the cost of living, about, again, you can be upset up until a certain point where a rose by any other name is socialism, which absolutely does not sell with the Cuban exile population.
Yeah, do not use the word socialism. And I think there's a difference with the younger generation of Cubans that are Cuban Americans that are opening their eyes and seeing that a lot of the policies that we've heard from the Republican Party over the years, that any day now we're going to be celebrating Noche Buena, which is the night, Christmas Eve for us. Next year, we're going to be celebrating Christmas Eve in Havana. All these promises that have been made. My parents passed, before they could step foot on a free Cuba. So many millions of people have passed before they could step foot on a free Cuba, because after all, it's been 65 plus years. But I think you're seeing a change among the younger people. And now at this particular moment, because we're talking as while there's a crisis going on right now between the United States and Cuba, with a boat being shot down off the coast of Cuba. So people are on the edge of their seats. I have families there, and when I heard about this boat, my first reaction was, "Oh, I bet these are Cubans going from Miami to try to get to their loved ones." I mean, I don't know if that's the case or not, but that was what I imagined first of all, because of the situation that's going there. You see people sifting through trash piles to try to get food, and it's just heartbreaking, especially when you think that this was an island that was just so ahead of its time back in the 1950s. You say there were a lot of problems in Cuba, absolutely, but overall it offered a very good place to live compared to other parts of Latin America back in 1959 when Fidel Castro took power and made it a heck of a lot worse.
I know this is a bit of a detour, but do Cubans, the people you think back in the country, do they trust one another? So many seeds of spying and your neighbor spying on you for benefit of the state. Everybody is out of sheer necessity had to look out for themselves, that they forgot what it was like to be free. They forgot what it was like to have a national aspiration. If you want to admit something to a neighbor, you might end up beaten up or imprisoned or something like that. I think a person in the United States right now would not know who's in charge of Cuba. Is it Fidel Castro's brother? Is it his brother's son? Is it some committee? It seems like an anonymous stump of what was left from the 1959 revolution, and a country that is certainly beleaguered, that is certainly hungry. There are reports of malnutrition and weight loss, just like you saw with Venezuela, median body weight, people not having enough energy to work, clearly a shortage of dollars, surely a shortage of potable water and foodstuffs. What makes, the impulse to kind of remove this regime and start over? It's a country that's very exhausted and beleaguered.
Well, the official leader in Cuba is a guy named Miguel Diaz-Canel, but he's grew up in the party system, went up the ranks, and was handpicked to be the president of Cuba. That's Miguel Diaz-Canel. But really the person who has been running things for quite a while is Raul Castro, the brother of Fidel Castro. He's up there in age, but we've read reports. First, it was broken by Axios. I think other media outlets have reported as well that Marco Rubio is literally negotiating or sending messages back and forth with Raul Castro's grandson, who has the nickname El Cangrejo, the crab. Now, why they call him the crab, because he moves slowly, I don't know, but I hope he moves fast on this one, because we really would like to see a resolution to this. The best outcome, in my opinion, is to remove that regime. Remove the regime and try to bring some sense of democracy in Cuba. It's not going to happen quickly. But the first thing you need to do is resume that regime. You have millions of Cubans who live, Cuban Americans in the United States, who want to go back and contribute and try to rebuild that country. I know that it happens. And people, Americans, listening to this, Robin, need to realize how close Cuba is to the United States. 90 miles from Key West to Havana. If you fly from Miami to Havana, the plane goes up, and before you know it, you're going down. Around 40 or 45 minutes later, you are in Havana, and when you step off that plane, it's like you stepped into a time machine with the 1950s cars, with the slogans, communist slogans still, on the walls, images of Fidel Castro, people riding bicycles. The Cuban economy is a mess. Yes, it's been affected by the embargo, but more than that, it's been affected by a system that simply does not work, a centralized communist system, which has not worked for the Cuban people. And what Cuba does, whenever there is an economic crisis, they just open the floodgates and let more immigrants come here. And I'll tell you one other thing that I heard from Marco Rubio the other day. He said, well, about this boat shooting. Marco Rubio said, we don't have too much information, but our embassy on the ground is investigating. Well, I thought to myself, how interesting, because when they opened that embassy, when Obama opened that embassy, who was criticizing it? Marco Rubio and many of the Cuban American elected leaders in South Florida. I, for one, am glad that there is a U.S. embassy in Cuba right now with an ambassador who is watching out for the interests of the United States. Some of these guys may be American citizens. We need to care for them. Imagine if we didn't have the embassy, we'd be doing it the old ways, where we had a quote unquote interest section, not an actual embassy. The interest section was located, by the way, inside the Swiss embassy in Havana, and I believe another embassy in Washington was the Cuban interest section, but Obama was the one who opened embassies in both countries.
An interesting side note is, by way of illustrating your district, Coconut Grove is not in your district, is it?
Oh, it is. Absolutely.
Oh, it is. So
are you registered to vote there?
For our listeners, yeah, Coconut Grove, the hotel in my book, Hotel Scarface. I mean, the Mutiny 100%. Hotel is right there in the heart of Coconut Grove. But as you know, Dinner Key Marina is also the site of the famous airport that in many respects predated Miami International Airport. And this is where the Pan Am Airport on Dinner Key Marina, there are glorious photos from the 1930s and 1940s of aristocratic, blue-blooded people from Palm Beach coming and taking a tiny Pan Am plane to Cuba. There was this great song, I'll see you in CUBA. It was very much an extension. It was like a getaway from Palm Beach and some of the most moneyed grandees of Miami. It was kind of interchangeable parts. It was like flying from not even like LA or San Diego to Vegas. That's how contiguous that was. Of course, with everything that happened and a lot of the exile community here in Miami, there's just been 65 plus years of aspiration for something to change. It's always the line that I hear is so close yet so far away.
So many times. Oh, by the way, there was also a ferry that went from Key West to Havana, and there actually had been talk to try to build some kind of causeway or bridge from Key West to Havana. I don't know how far along that got, but I know the ferry was very popular. People would take a ferry and be in Havana before you knew it. And Havana, like we've said, was a playground where Americans love to go. And I tell you another thing, because I reported a lot from Cuba when I worked for CBS and the ABC stations here in Miami. Cubans love Americans and American culture. I mean, they don't have much love for the government of the United States, at least the ones that are believers in the revolution. Maybe others too, because they don't agree. They think that the two governments should try to, work things out. But in general, Cubans love American culture, everything about the United States. Baseball tells you everything, because baseball has been God in Cuba for so many years. Anything that has to do with American culture, they're in. That's what they want to hear. They want their phones. They want to listen to American music. They want to hear Bad Bunny and whoever else, Taylor Swift, whatever. There's some older ones that love the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and jazz. Cuba's a great place for music and culture. And again, there's that great love for the United States, which is such another terrible reason why these two countries have been at odds with each other for so long. most of that blame, in my opinion, belongs to the Cuban regime.
Another quick anecdote before we go to break. You're a University of Miami grad, right?
What do you think?
It's all about you. I love the Canes. I grew up with the Canes. I'm most fanatic about it. And it's interesting in that we just had a national championship game held in Miami at Hard Rock Stadium, where the coach of the Miami Hurricanes, Cuban American, a famous alum of Miami, Mario Cristobal, the quarterback, the MVP of the other team, a Heisman Trophy winner, right? Fernando Mendoza went to high school. A child of Miami, wanted to play for the Canes. Exactly 100 years prior to that, on the first year of University of Miami football, two of their games in the inaugural 8-0 campaign were against the University of Havana. One in Miami at the predecessor to Burdine Stadium, and the other in Havana. That's how close and interchangeable we are. But I always digress. Eliott Rodriguez, please do stay with us.
Okay, we'll do.
Full Disclosure airs on NPR, Spotify, YouTube, all of the fine podcatchers. I've put them all at one neat link for you, fulldradio.com. Again, fulldradio.com. A shout out to our listeners on NPR, Superstation, WVTF, Radio IQ across the great Commonwealth. We are on WPBM in the mountains of Asheville, North Carolina. Out west, we're on KPPQ. I wish WLRN would carry me in Miami. I grew up listening to you guys, but holler if you hear this, Tom. Of course, I've put them all again at one neat link, fulldradio.com, and catch me on all social media, Instagram, LinkedIn. I'm sure I still have a MySpace handle. And remember that my DMs are always open. And additionally, catch me every week on both CNN and NPR's Here and Now. If you're just joining us, my esteemed guest is Eliott Rodriguez. He is a veteran Miami newsman, now pondering a run for its much coveted 27th U.S. congressional seat, held by also a former news person, Maria Elvira Salazar. Of course, he wants to flip it blue. I also will say that I'm joined here by these Crockett and Tubbs, a listener who plays or sends us these things. I mean, we grew up in that era. It tells
best
you that
show. Greatest TV show ever, Miami Vice.
And you covered that, and you were invited to all of the things in your 1980s Miami heyday. I got to ask you, going back to the issues at hand here, Marco Rubio, child of Miami, he is now Secretary of State, also I believe National Security Advisor, and in many respects, kind of like Donald Trump's man in the hemisphere, because it's not like Witkoff and Kushner. They're busy with the Middle East, with Iran and with Gaza and everything. But Venezuela and Cuba seemingly handled by the Cuban-American child of Miami, considered to be a very likely candidate, very popular former U.S. Senator in Florida. People are going to hate me for saying this, but I left it on the cutting room floor in the book, and you might also cringe, but it's been reported. It's been in the Washington Post and the Miami New Times. 40 years ago, Marco Rubio was guarding a stash house for his uncle in Miami. His uncle, he's very open about it. A lot of people didn't know what their uncles were doing. Was a prolific cocaine dealer for the Tabrawi, syndicate. And Marco says he was just trying to earn money to go to Dolphins games. Only in this country can you go from 1985 to guarding a cocaine stash house to 2025, extracting who you argue is the leader of hemispheric cocaine trafficking in Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela. And now he's in charge of the negotiations seemingly for Cuba. How big a victory would it be if under Marco Rubio's watch, he liberates Cuba?
Whoever liberates Cuba will make me happy, Robin. If it's Marco Rubio, so be it. There's a lot of pride in South Florida that a Cuban American like Marco Rubio has risen to that position of Secretary of State, and as you mentioned, also National Security Advisor. What's happening in Cuba and Venezuela, you can be rest assured that that's Marco Rubio. He's in charge of that. And people applauded when they grabbed Nicolas Maduro and took him out of Venezuela and brought him, because everybody was in agreement that the election from a few years ago was stolen. It was not a clean and fair election.
That's US not me 2020. You're talking about Cuba.
I'm talking about Cuba. Don't you start trouble. Don't you start trouble. Okay. So now you made me lose my train of thought. We're going to have to edit that. Wait, what was I saying?
The election was stolen. The impression that the election was stolen in Cuba.
Oh, okay. All right, here you go. the Carter Center had sent observers to Caracas to observe that election, and they also concluded that there was cheating in the election in which Nicolas Maduro won. Edmundo Gonzalez is said to have been the winner of that election. He is the candidate backed up by Maria Corina Machado, the woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize and then quite mysteriously gave it to Donald Trump. But whatever, a lot of people were hoping that since that election that Maduro stole was nullified, then you should put the guy who should have won the election, Edmundo Gonzalez, with Maria Corina Machado to lead Venezuela. I thought that that's where Marco Rubio was going, but no, they left Eliott Rodriguez, who was the vice president under Maduro. So I got to scratch my head and wonder what has changed in Venezuela. As far as Cuba, now I'm reading that Marco Rubio says the issue we have to resolve in Cuba is the economy, and we have to grow small business, and we have to talk to the Cuban government. Well, they're adopting points that Democrats have been saying for years. Obama went to Cuba to try to support the growing private businesses on the island, to open up channels of communication. He never talked about sending any tax dollars over there, that's for sure. But now you have Marco Rubio saying that he is talking to the Cuban government, negotiating with them, and that they want to send oil from Venezuela to Cuba and sell it to the private sector in Cuba. And I'm asking myself, what private sector that sells oil? As far as I know, oil is sold in Cuba by the government. But you know what? If these things work, I may not agree with it. As a Cuban American, it would make me happy to see some change finally with that regime out of the picture in Cuba, because I still have family members there. And you know what? People want to live in their country. You know, they don't want to live under oppression. They don't want to live under communism. They don't want to live in a country that can't get oil and people are on the streets, but they want to live in their country rather than pick up, uproot, and go to another country. That's one way that we would control immigration to this country.
Eliott, before I get to the 27th district in South Florida, and you know, there's a significant crossover with what's happening on the island of Cuba and what's happening just 90 miles from Key West. What happens? I'm sure you've ran the simulation in your head, and this has been the subject of many cafecito conversations, and you talk to many executives in the exile community. The morning after Cuba's regime topples, or maybe they get on a plane like Bautista did, the dictator in the 1950s, and they leave and the island topples. Is there just a giant flotilla of people wanting to leave? Is it going to happen the other way around, where everybody in South Florida, everybody in New Jersey wants to go there and get their dibs, wants to invest in the island? Just 60 years of pent up yearning and wanting. How does it even play out?
My God, there's going to be so much celebration when Raul Castro, Miguel Diaz-Canel, and that whole regime is out of the picture. And when you talk about, if they get on a plane and fly someplace else, Moscow or wherever the heck Beijing, wherever it is that they want to go, good riddance to them. Adios y que más nunca te vea. Goodbye. I hope I never see you again. I think first you're going to have joy in the Cuban community here in South Florida, the community in general. Second, you're going to have people that want to know, how can I help? What can I do? And there is a danger that you may have a mass migration. So that's something that the Coast Guard and the U.S. authorities have to be aware of. There might be a danger of people here going over there, as what happened in 1980, to bring people back. I think it would be more useful to have people here take humanitarian aid to Cuba right away. This should be a rapid response, that if that were to happen in Cuba right away, we would help those people get their feet back on the ground and try to nurture the return of democracy to that island. It's been 65 plus years, so it's not going to be an easy job. It's not going to happen overnight, but 65 years has been too long for this regime to be in power. So those of us here in South Florida, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, Cuban American, you want that regime out of there.
Let's talk about South Florida to close out the show in the 10 minutes or so we have left with you, Eliott. I last lived in Miami at the turn of the century. I always love saying that on that show because it makes me look venerable. Like my kids think I'm Theodore Roosevelt when I say that, right? But I lived on Brickell Avenue, where you're joining us from right now, which is
Yeah.
the corridor south of downtown Miami. It is downtown Miami, and it leads to Coconut Grove. Miami, that district is absolutely unrecognizable to me now. I'm a stranger in a strange land, and of course, the skyline there is always changing, but something definitely tripped a wire during COVID, where a bunch of New Yorkers and Californians and people of other states discovered something that you and I knew about for 50 years, right? That this is a great place. It's very lovable. It's really flawed as you talk about infrastructure and other things, but it was affordable until recently. You suddenly have hedge funds. You have a Wall Street of the South mentality. Goldman Sachs doubling down. Some of the largest hedge funds in the world. You just had Palantir relocating there. Jeff Bezos of Amazon is a product of Palmetto Senior High, as is a Supreme Court justice. There's suddenly this renaissance in an area which you knew covering subprime completely bombed out by 2009. This has caused all sorts of affordability issues there. It's from crowding, from cost of goods, from labor, from business startups. It's kind of a duality to Miami right now, which is kind of a very difficult thing, even for a seasoned student of Miami, a person who wrote about it. When somebody asks you how you're going to roll up your sleeves and address the livability and affordability crisis, how would you go about it?
Well, it's the number one issue in this district, and I think in all of South Florida. People can't afford to live here. The rents are out of control. People can't afford to buy a house. People who own a house and want to sell and buy something else can't do it because if they sell, what can I afford? So this is definitely an issue that all our lawmakers at the local, state, and federal level need to focus on to see what we can do to try to create more affordable housing, to try to come up with programs that help young homeowners buy their first home. I can tell you in my case, my daughters have had to move. I have two living in Orlando and one who's now told me, Dad, we're moving to North Carolina because we can't afford to buy a house in Miami. And here you have, she has a great job. Her husband has a great job and they have a 1-year-old baby, but they can't afford, they don't happen to have $2 million in their back pocket, so they can't afford to buy a house. They took a trip to visit friends in Raleigh, North Carolina, and she came back saying, look, we can afford a 3-4 bedroom house with a garage in a nice neighborhood with good public schools. So my wife and I are heartbroken because now they're going to move to Raleigh, North Carolina. By the way, it's probably a great place. I haven't been there,
It's
but
fabulous. It's
I'm sure
booming.
I'm sure it's fabulous and it's booming. But you know, as grandparents, you want, and as parents, you would love for your children to have the opportunity to live here, but they can't even touch anything. So they'll do that, and we'll travel to see them. But housing affordability is the number one issue. And yes, all these buildings that are going up in Brickell, these beautiful skyscrapers, I drive around town at night sometimes and I see all the windows dark. I don't see people living in these units. So what does it tell you? It tells you that people want to invest, park their money in Miami, and maybe they use it part-time, but it's an investment. We're a global city and we're becoming a global city only for people, well-heeled people, but we have to provide housing for police officers, firefighters, teachers,
Restaurant workers. I mean,
restaurant workers,
hospitality workers. You can't
you
launch.
name
You
it.
can't do
I
anything.
my niece is a veterinarian. She's doing fantastic. She's living with my sister at her parents' house because she tells me, look, I can rent an apartment in Brickell, but I'd be blowing so much money that doesn't make sense. So I said, Alyssa, Dr. Perez, stay where you are at home until the time is right. But you know, I'm waiting for the day where she says, you know, Uncle Eliott, I may have to, you know, move to
Doral,
uh,
God forbid. God
no,
forbid Doral.
I've
Sorry,
got, okay,
I
I
know
have
you
a
work there.
trivia question for you. How did they come up with the name Doral?
Was it from the cigarette brand?
No, it was Doris and Al, the couple that ran the golf course, the Doral
Wow.
Country Club golf course. Doris and Al, that's Doral, which, by the
And
way, has turned into such a magnificent city.
so that's a
It has,
Trump. That is the Trump Doral
well,
golf course now.
that's where the Trump Doral
And
golf
am I
course
to
is
understand
located.
that
It's still a magnificent city. What's
Donald
that?
Trump would build his presidential library? Is that in your district under the Miami
No,
Freedom Tower?
no. This is a big problem here in South Florida. Miami-Dade College, of which I am a graduate, agreed to donate a plot of land worth something like in the $300 million range, right smack in downtown Miami, next door to the Freedom Tower. They're donating this to the state of Florida, and the state of Florida, in turn, is donating this to the Trump family so that they can put the Trump Presidential Library right in downtown Miami. And I was asking people, didn't Trump say that that plane he's going to get for free from the Middle East, I forgot which emirate it was, didn't he say that that was going to go in his library? And I'm thinking to myself, is there room there to put a jumbo jet? That's pretty questionable, but that's a big controversy here. There have been some legal battles over it, because it's basically a gift. They're giving this very valuable land that belongs to Miami-Dade College. They're giving it to the Trump family.
Miami-Dade College, which is the largest student population of any community college in the country, I heard.
That's right. Miami-Dade College is a wonderful institution that makes education, higher education, affordable. It's made, to millions of students here in South Florida. It's been around since the 1960s. It was headed for a long time by Dr. Eduardo Padron, and now a lady named Madeline Pumirega is doing, generally speaking, she's doing a wonderful job at Miami-Dade College, although I personally do not agree with giving away such a valuable piece of land.
I'm old enough, and I'm sure if you go on the Wolfson archives online, there's all these clips of Eliott Rodriguez and other friends in our coterie, Glenna Milberg and Jose Diaz-Balart.
Yes.
I'm a big Sally Fitz person.
Oh, my God, yes.
And, Jill Beach and all these names, when I throw them out at you, I grew up on these names. And this is neither here nor there, but you could find you covering that area in the shadow of the Miami Freedom Tower, which has recently had its grand 100-year reopening. It was utter dereliction. You could not give land away around it. And now the fact that all of this stuff is being picked off, you have things right on the brink of I-95 where they're putting up towers that you never would have imagined. It's not affordable housing, right? No. That you have whole new districts. Like we have a Midtown in Miami. We have an Upper East Side.
Upper East Side.
Right? Little Haiti. They call parts of it, Ironside, and the unbelievable restaurant scene. I do ask in closing, what strings can a member of Congress pull, or even a senator, in terms of housing? It's not like Venezuela, where somebody calls into the late Hugo Chavez's show, Allo Comandante or something, and says, I can't afford my house and my daughter's getting married. Send this man 4 sacks of concrete and a hog to slaughter. Like, the Fed controls policy, the vagaries of the economy. There's fiscal policy, monetary policy. What could you do as a congressperson eyeing the 27th district?
Well, thank you for asking that. First of all, let me let your audience know that I never had any intention of being involved in politics. When I stepped down from CBS Miami, I was approached by a group of people who have a campaign called Keep Them Honest to defend the rights of immigrants. And they approached me and asked me if I would do a couple of videos for them, in different languages. And I said, absolutely, I'll do it. Guess what? Because my parents were immigrants and I'm horrified by what I'm seeing. And then they followed that up by saying, hey, Eliott, have you ever thought of running for office? And I said, hell no. I don't want to be crazy. That's the last thing in the world I want to do. But they were very persistent, Robin. And what the conclusion that I came to was, I don't think this is a time for people to sit on the sidelines when you believe that our democracy is in danger, as I do. When you feel as strongly as I do that no one deserves to be treated like what we're seeing with these ICE agents wearing masks and going to Minnesota, which has a small, undocumented immigrant community. Come on, we know this was political. This is just government-sponsored cruelty. So when I see that, and then I see our member of Congress who's not speaking out about this or is trying to speak out of both sides of her mouth about this, I felt that if I'm uniquely qualified because I'm Cuban American like she is, I am a Democrat, I've lived in this district for a long time, and I have the name recognition, and I feel horrific about what's happening, I'm willing to do it. I haven't filed yet, but I am willing to do it. And what could I do? I could focus on the issues that actually affect the district, like we were talking about: affordability, infrastructure, the lack of health insurance, the people that were kicked off their Obamacare subsidies. This is one of the biggest districts in the country with Obamacare recipients, and we're cutting them off. So, of course, I care about Cuba. I care about what happens to Venezuela, but I would focus on what's happening in our district. It's a district that I've covered a long time, as you've said many times, that I've been around since the beginning of time. By the way, I was not here for the incorporation of Miami in 1896 or whatever it was. So stop saying that.
I said you covered the Great Hurricane of 1926.
I didn't.
As a sarcastic nod to how long you've been covering Miami.
Okay, very funny. I did cover Hurricane Andrew in 1992, which was also a big one.
Which really hit the reset button to all of Miami. I was in the Keys for an event last week, and I cut through Homestead, and I can't believe Homestead is really now a thriving exurb for the livability crisis, the measures that people have to go through to be proximate to work in downtown Miami is pretty extraordinary. I've never seen the city have this kind of a growth spurt in so short a time.
No, your hometown is really moving in a very fast direction. We have so much to offer. The diversity here in this town is our biggest asset, in my opinion. Not to mention that up north there's a blizzard and we have 80 degrees outside and beautiful weather most of the time. So yeah, we have a lot of issues to work out. Yeah, we have a lot of people that are moving here and discovering what we have to offer. And we need to integrate those people into our communities here in South Florida. Many of them want to do that. And I think our future is as bright as it's ever been. This is the place to be. And I think the world is recognizing it. And, you know, we welcome people here, but we have to make this livable for everybody.
You know, in closing, Eliott, as you know, full disclosure is a nonpartisan show. I love having personalities on. We discuss the business of culture. I'm, of course, gravitationally pulled to all Miami stories. But I'm going to leave you with a hot pro tip. If you can get the Public Sub and Pollo Tropical industrial complexes to espouse iguana meat, you solve two big problems with one stone. There's plenty of iguana meat to go around, as you know from the recent cold snap there. Python meat too, wild boar in the Everglades. Use your illusion and you'll bring the affordability crisis to its heels, sir.
Right, we got to get rid of those invasive species one way or the other. Roben, thank you so much.
Eliott Rodriguez, veteran Miami newsman, considering a run for the 27th district. You're always welcome on this show.
Thank you.
Thank you. Full disclosure, special thanks again to Ian Stewart. If you are listening to us on the radio, note that while we cut for broadcast, the entirety of every interview is on podcast, whether on the NPR app, Spotify, Apple, YouTube. Find them all at one neat link, fulldradio.com. Again, fulldradio.com. And recommend us to a friend. And catch me on both CNN and NPR's Here and Now. I'm Roben Farzad. Thank you for listening. Back with you next week.